Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Very excited to talk with you. I am from the US government. We're here to help, and I want to talk to you about transparency in the software supply chain and something called SBOM, Software Bill of Materials. So at the panel before the previous speaker, it was a discussion that, hey, not everyone who ships software actually knows they're using open source. And for the people who are using software, whether it's proprietary or open source, not everyone knows what's running on their network, what's driving their system. And so a key aspect for cybersecurity, as well as issues around software quality, and of course, software licensing, we need to have a world where there's greater transparency into what we're doing. Now, some of the challenges are around security. So I'm going to focus on that today. Software supply chain attacks have grown astronomically over the last couple of years. We've heard of some of the famous ones, but there are a lot smaller ones, right? People just taking over small maintainers that don't have a lot of security built in, and then just integrating coin miners or much more damaging attacks. So the vision is to sort of have this. Now, this is a good sign. From a security perspective, it means that as a whole, our software in the community has gotten better. And so attackers have to go and look at the supply chain. But it also means that to track that, especially once we know that there's been an attack, we need to use the idea that there is greater transparency. So people need to know what they have and what they're using. Now, this isn't a new idea. And in fact, in the rest of the world, outside of software, we track things. So, if I go out and buy a Twinkie, it's going to come with a list of ingredients. Why don't we expect that same level of transparency that we get from a biodegradable snack, a non-biodegradable snack, that we would expect in the software that runs our world, that runs our critical infrastructure, and our most important systems? Now, this analogy of a list of ingredients is powerful because we also need to acknowledge what a list of ingredients doesn't do. A list of ingredients by itself will not keep me on my January 2023 diet. A list of ingredients by itself will not prevent someone in my family from eating a substance that they're very allergic to, or it won't by itself enable me to follow a religious-based dietary restriction or plant-based lifestyle or something like that. But good luck doing any of those things without that list of ingredients. So it's an enabler that starts us off to say, well, first we need to know what we have, and then we can align it to risks, concerns, and improvements. So at its core, we need to understand what we have in our software ecosystem. So Allan, you've talked a little bit on SBOM. What's an SBOM? Here's a very simple toy example. I've got my application, Acme application. It has two dependencies, Bingo Buffer and Bob's Browser. Bob's Browser, in turn, depends on Carol's compression engine. For each of these components, I don't need that much data. I need to know who's the supplier, right? What package did it come from? What's the component? Which version? And right, Semver is wonderful. Please use Semver, but not everyone does. And then what's the author? Where did this data come from? Did it come from the open source repository? Did it come from an analysis tool? Did it come from a proprietary vendor? So we can track this. Now, this helps across the entire life cycle of software. If you write software, it's very difficult to say that you have a secure development process and a mature development process if you're not actually tracking what you have and which versions you're using. If you're in the business of choosing software, hey, should I use this open source project or this open source project for my software that I'm developing? Well, you need to know what they in turn are using, right, to do your proper risk management, your supply chain management. And then lastly, if you operate software, and a new risk comes along when the next Log4j ruins everyone's December, how do we make sure that we're tracking whether or not we're exposed? Now, we can do this in an automation-friendly way. There are two data formats today. One is SPDX, comes out of Linux Foundation. The other is CycloneDX that comes out of OWASP. They're both open source, and we've emphasized collaboration. We have done a lot of great work on thinking about how to generate this data in a machine-readable fashion that scales. And now we're shifting to thinking about consumption. And of course, sometimes there are going to be risks in our supply chain that don't actually affect things. So amnesia, 33 was a set of IoT vulnerabilities that affected a lot of proprietary manufacturers, as well as some open source projects. And the Zephyr project, which is an open source IoT project, had to issue a clarification that says, we're not affected by this vulnerability. And so we've introduced this idea of VEX that allows us to say, hey, this project or this product is not affected by this vulnerability, and that'll allow us to scale. So how do we make sure that this is something that can work through the ecosystem? Well, this is a quote from one of the largest commercial software providers on the planet. He said, we like this idea, we want it, it'll help us, but we'll do it when someone makes us. So enter your friends in the US government, who last year declared through the White House an executive order that said, first, hey, if we're going to trust our digital infrastructure, that needs to be transparent. That was from the president's introduction to this order. But it also essentially ultimately is going to require everything that the US government buys, including in sources, so it includes SBOM, that includes open source, to have a software bill of materials, an SBOM. If you want to know more, you can look this up. But essentially, the US government sources a lot of software, and so we're going to see this be moving from industry. And as proprietary projects, proprietary software says, well, we use this open source, we need to know which open source we're using. So what's the state of SBOM in 2022? This is still a maturing technology. It's more commonly accepted. We have a lot of buy-in from different corners of the open source world, but a lot of people haven't heard about it. So this is why I'm here to talk to you about it today. And ultimately, there's no reason why everyone in the software world should not start saying, well, I can provide this data about my software. And for the other pieces of software that I'm using, I can go and ask for supply chain information, for SBOM data in a machine readable, scalable way. So closing out, we in the US government are working very hard to collaborate with the open source community to advance this idea. This is an international effort. It's something that folks from around the world are participating. Want to call out a couple of Japanese open source experts who get up at very, very early in the morning their time to join some of these discussions. And we have some ongoing work to enhance and refine this effort. So I talked about the VEX, the idea of communicating security vulnerabilities don't affect us. Another work stream is focusing on cloud and SaaS. Right? Very few people have come to me over the last few years and said, you know, Allan, the future of software is on-premise, right? We know that modern applications are going to be part of this, even in things like industrial control systems. We're starting to see online applications and mobile applications that sort of supervise them. And one of the other common things that I want to sort of emphasize for this community is tooling and implementation. A lot of this work to scale has to be with open source tools, and there are a number today, but we always need more. And so for different software domains, whether you work in Node and NPM or Maven and Java, or going old school to the kernel, there's a lot of work to be done. But there's also been some great progress. So for example, there's a Docker command today called SBOM. You know what it does? Gives you an SBOM. So if you're interested in thinking about transparency, how it can help your corner of the ecosystem or your sector, we'd love to have you participate and join us. So SBOM at CISA.dhs.gov. Send us a note and come participate. It's the closest thing to an open source process that we have in a large government bureaucracy. So we'd love your help. Thanks for your time, and feel free to reach out if you have further questions.